At 0947 on February 19, 1945, Lieutenant Commander Daniel O'Callaghan watched his LST-477 approach the black volcanic beaches of Iwo Jima. 15 assault waves had already failed to penetrate beyond the shoreline. The problem wasn't Japanese fire, it was physics. Standard LST ramps extended 14 feet from the bow. On Iwo Jima's steep volcanic shelf, that meant the ramp touched down in 9 feet of water. Marines loaded with 80 pounds of equipment stepped off into water over their heads. 16 men from the first wave drowned before reaching the beach. Not shot, drowned. O'Callaghan's LST was different. His ramp extended 32 feet. An additional 18-foot section he'd welded himself at Pearl Harbor 3 months earlier, over the furious objections of Naval Engineering Command. They'd called it suicide. Unstable. Structurally unsound. A death trap waiting to collapse under load. The modified ramp hit volcanic sand in 4 feet of water. Marines walked off dry from the knees up. Every man made it to cover. O'Callaghan's LST completed 6 runs that morning. 0 drownings. By noon, every LST commander on the beach was screaming for ramp extensions. The modification O'Callaghan had been threatened with court-martial for implementing had become the most critical piece of equipment on Iwo Jima. But the story begins 7 months earlier, in the calm waters of Pearl Harbor. June 1944, Lieutenant Commander Daniel O'Callaghan stood on the deck of LST-477, watching his crew practice beach approaches. Standard procedure: run the bow onto sand, drop the ramp, offload cargo, retract and withdraw. They'd done it 47 times across the Pacific. Tarawa, Kwajalein, Saipan. Always the same. O'Callaghan was 34, Naval Academy graduate, civil engineering degree from MIT. He'd spent 3 years designing docks and piers before the war. He understood load distribution, structural stress, hydraulic resistance. And he'd noticed something Naval Command apparently hadn't. Every island they'd taken had shallow approach beaches. Tarawa's lagoon averaged 3 feet deep for 400 yards. Kwajalein's coral shelf extended nearly a quarter mile at tide. LST ramps worked fine in shallow water. The problem was coming. Intelligence reports from submarine reconnaissance showed Japan's inner defensive ring had different geography. Steeper coastal shelves. Volcanic formation instead of coral. Deeper water closer to shore. The Pacific Island hopping campaign was moving into terrain where standard LST design would fail catastrophically. O'Callaghan ran the numbers. Standard LST-1 class vessels, 328 feet long, 50-foot beam, 4,080 tons fully loaded. The bow ramp weighed 8 tons, extended 14 feet when deployed, operated by twin hydraulic rams, generating 22,000 pounds of force. Maximum safe load capacity, 60 tons distributed evenly. The ramp could theoretically extend further. The hydraulics had excess capacity, but Navy engineers had calculated 14 feet as the optimal balance between reach and structural integrity. Except the calculation assumed beach slopes between 1.8 and 1.12. Gradual descents common to coral atolls. Volcanic islands had slopes approaching 1.4. 4 times steeper. On a 1.4 slope, a 14-foot ramp touched down in water 42 inches deep. Add tidal variation and wave action, and you were routinely putting Marines into 5 or 6 feet of water, wearing 80-pound combat loads. O'Callaghan proposed a solution to his superior officer, Commander James Mitchell, head of LST operations at Pearl Harbor. Extend the ramps. Add an 18-foot hinged section that could deploy beyond the standard ramp length. Touch down in shallower water. Simple physics. Mitchell's response was immediate and absolute: no. The reasoning was sound from a certain perspective. LST ramps weren't designed as modular systems. They were integrated structural components carefully balanced against vessel displacement and bow buoyancy. Adding 18 feet of steel meant adding roughly 6 tons to the forward section. That changed the ship's center of gravity, altered handling characteristics, created new stress points at the hinge connection. And most critically, the extended ramp would be operating beyond the load parameters Navy engineers had certified as safe. If an extended ramp collapsed under the weight of a Sherman tank or fully loaded DUKW amphibious vehicle, The resulting catastrophe could kill dozens and disable the LST. Mitchell wasn't being obstinate. He was following regulations designed to prevent exactly that kind of disaster. O'Callaghan understood the objections. He also understood the math. The structural stress calculations were conservative. Navy engineers had built safety margins into every specification. The hydraulic rams had 40% excess capacity. The ramp hinge points were rated for loads 3 times higher than normal operations generated. The steel I-beams forming the ramp structure could handle significantly more weight than their certified capacity. The problem wasn't capability, it was bureaucracy. So O'Callaghan did something career naval officers don't do. He ignored orders. Over a 2-week period in late June 1944, O'Callaghan and his engineering crew fabricated an extension section in the Pearl Harbor maintenance yards. They worked during off-duty hours, using spare steel plate and I-beam stock technically allocated for other repairs. The extension measured 18 feet long, 12 feet wide, weighed 5,900 pounds. 3 heavy-duty hinges connected it to the standard ramp. 4 hydraulic support struts provided stability when deployed. The modification was elegant. The extension folded up against the bow door when not in use, adding minimal drag during transit. When the standard ramp deployed, a second hydraulic control released the extension, which pivoted down and locked into position. Total deployment time increased by only 7 seconds. On July 3, 1944, O'Callaghan conducted unauthorized testing. He ran LST 477 onto a steep-sloped beach on Oahu's northern coast, deployed the extended ramp, drove a 30-ton Sherman tank down the full length. The structure held, no deformation, no stress cracks. The hydraulics handled the load without strain. He ran 6 more tests with progressively heavier loads. Maximum test, 2 DUKWs simultaneously, total weight 38 tons. The ramp performed flawlessly. Commander Mitchell discovered the modification 2 days later during a routine inspection. The confrontation occurred on the deck of LST 477, within earshot of the crew. Mitchell's position was unambiguous. O'Callaghan had violated direct orders, used Navy materials without authorization, modified a vessel's critical structure without engineering approval, and endangered his crew by deploying an uncertified system. The penalty could include court-martial, reduction in rank, and removal from command. O'Callaghan's defense was equally direct. He provided his calculations, his test data, his analysis of Pacific Island geography. He demonstrated the extension mechanism. He showed photographs of Marines drowning in deep water at Saipan because standard ramps terminated too far offshore. Mitchell wasn't persuaded by the engineering. He was naval command. O'Callaghan had broken protocol, but Mitchell made a pragmatic decision. Rather than court-martial, he would refer the matter to the Naval Engineering Command for official review. If they certified the design as safe, O'Callaghan would face only a formal reprimand. If they rejected it, court-martial would proceed. The review took 6 weeks. Naval Engineering Command assigned the evaluation to Lieutenant Commander Robert Haynes, a structural engineer with 12 years' experience in ship design. Haynes examined O'Callaghan's calculations, reviewed his test data, and conducted his own stress analysis. His conclusion, filed August 19, 1944. The modification was structurally sound, but operationally dangerous. The danger wasn't the ramp itself, it was deployment doctrine. Standard LST procedure called for approaching the beach at 8 knots, driving the bow onto sand with enough momentum to wedge the vessel in place. That impact stress was calculated for the standard ramp configuration. An extended ramp added 6 tons to the bow, changing the impact dynamics. There was theoretical risk that the additional weight could cause structural damage during aggressive beaching, potentially buckling the extension hinges or cracking the connection points to the main ramp. Haynes recommended rejection with a note. While Lieutenant Commander O'Callaghan's engineering is competent, combat operations cannot accommodate the procedural modifications his design requires. Standard doctrine prioritizes rapid deployment. This modification prioritizes safety margins incompatible with combat tempo. It was a death sentence for the project, and for hundreds of Marines who would drown over the following months. Except Lieutenant General Holland, Howlin' Mad Smith read the report. Smith commanded V Amphibious Corps. He'd led landings at Tarawa, Kwajalein, Saipan. He'd written casualty reports listing men drowned in surf, not killed by enemy fire. He'd argued for years that LST design was flawed for steep beach operations. Naval Command had repeatedly dismissed his concerns as outside his expertise. O'Callaghan's modification was exactly what Smith had been demanding. Smith made a direct request to Admiral Richmond Turner, commander of amphibious forces in the Pacific. Request was technically inaccurate. Smith didn't request. He demanded. Either Naval Command approved ramp extensions fleet-wide, or Smith would personally brief every war correspondent in the Pacific about how Navy bureaucracy was killing Marines. Turner escalated to Admiral Nimitz. Nimitz reviewed the engineering reports, the casualty data, and the upcoming operations schedule. Iwo Jima was on the target list. Submarine reconnaissance showed steep volcanic beaches. Okinawa would be worse. The casualties from deep-water exits would be catastrophic. On September 12, 1944, Nimitz issued a fleet-wide directive. All LST-1 class vessels were to be fitted with extended ramp systems based on O'Callaghan's design, pending completion of operational testing. 20 LSTs would receive the modification immediately for evaluation during the upcoming Leyte Gulf operation in October. O'Callaghan was vindicated and placed in an impossible position. He'd created a working prototype. Now he had to standardize it for 400 vessels, write technical specifications, train installation crews, and produce enough extension sections to outfit 1/5 of the Pacific Fleet's LST force. He had 5 weeks. The Pearl Harbor fabrication yards ran double shifts. O'Callaghan worked 19-hour days, supervising construction, checking welds, testing hydraulics. Each extension section required 47 individual components, 216 rivets, 840 pounds of steel plate, and 12 hours of skilled labor. They needed to produce 4 sections per day to meet the deadline. They managed 3. By October 15th, 19 LSTs had extended ramps installed. The 20th vessel, LST 773, completed its modification on October 17th, 2 days behind schedule. The ships deployed to Leyte Gulf on October 20th. The Leyte landings occurred on beaches with 1.6 approach slopes, exactly the scenario O'Callaghan had predicted. Standard ramps terminated in 50 inches of water. Extended ramps reached 28 inches. The difference was life or death for Marines carrying heavy flamethrower equipment and mortar base plates. After action reports confirmed 0 drownings from LSTs equipped with extended ramps. Vessels with standard ramps reported 12 casualties from deep-water exits. The data was incontrovertible. On November 8, 1944, Admiral Nimitz expanded the directive. All LSTs operating in the Pacific Theater would receive ramp extensions. Priority schedule: vessels assigned to Iwo Jima operations first. By January 1945, 287 LSTs had been modified. O'Callaghan's unauthorized welding project had become standard equipment. February 19, 1945. Iwo Jima. The validation came in blood and volcanic sand. The island's beaches had slopes approaching 1.35, the steepest combat landings in Pacific history. Standard LST ramps would have terminated in 11 feet of water. Marines would have drowned by the dozens before Japanese guns even opened fire. Extended ramps touched down in 4 to 5 feet of depth. Survivable, barely. Over 8 days, LSTs made 2,847 individual beach runs on Iwo Jima. They delivered 73,000 Marines, 7,800 tons of ammunition, 3,200 vehicles, and 14,000 tons of supplies. The extended ramps made every single run possible. Without them, Iwo Jima would have been logistically unattainable. The operation would have failed before the first Marine reached Mount Suribachi. O'Callaghan wasn't there to see it. He was in Guam, training LST crews for Okinawa. But Admiral Turner sent him a message via naval radio. "Your ramps worked. Every Marine who walked off dry owes you his life." Turner. The official commendation came later. O'Callaghan received the Legion of Merit for exceptionally meritorious conduct in the performance of outstanding services related to amphibious operations. The citation carefully avoided mentioning that his achievement began with ignoring direct orders. The ramp extensions remained standard equipment through Okinawa and were scheduled for the planned invasion of Japan's home islands. After the war, the modification was incorporated into the LST-2 class design specifications. Every subsequent generation of landing ship included extended ramp capability as baseline engineering. Commander Mitchell, who'd threatened court-martial, later wrote in his memoir, "O'Callaghan was right and I was wrong. Sometimes the courage to violate regulations matters more than the discipline to follow them. I'm grateful he didn't listen to me." O'Callaghan left active duty in 1946. He returned to MIT, taught structural engineering for 23 years. He rarely discussed the ramp modification. When students asked about his military service, he deflected. The recognition made him uncomfortable. He'd solved a problem, that was all. He died in 1982, age 72. His obituary in the New York Times mentioned his MIT teaching career and his Legion of Merit. It didn't mention the ramps. It didn't mention Iwo Jima. It didn't mention that his unauthorized welding project saved thousands of lives. History remembers the Marines who took Iwo Jima. It rarely remembers the engineer who made sure they could reach the beach alive.